Michael Boyles, StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 221 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyles, StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. All right, I'm your host, Anthony Renda, and the show notes are located at ContinueFit.com. That's where I keep all my podcasts as well as Strength Coach TV. A reminder about the success series that I did, 5 audio interviews on achieving success in the fitness business. They're free. You just got to sign up, check it out, and let me know what you think. All right, on the Coach's Corner today, I spoke to Coach Boyle about a thread called Stato Dynamic Training Method Implementation. See, I can't even say that. A thread called Helping a 6'3", 300-pound lineman Get Leaner. Returning to strength exercises after a hamstring injury, and med ball target training. That and much more coming up on the Coach's Corner in a little while. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Rachel Cosgrove is on to discuss revisiting your numbers and transparency with your team. For the Functional Movement System segment, Eric DeGotti finishes his 3-part series about foot positions called The Power of 3. For the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, I have on Mark Watts, who is a 5th grade school teacher, but he's the former director of education at Elite FDS, and he was the host of their podcast as well. He's on to talk about working with youth athletes, changing the outcome over process mentality, the only 3 phrases you'll need to say to your kids about sports, and how teaching 5th grade has changed his perspective on coaching. This is part 1 of a part 2 series. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, everybody, welcome to the Coach's Corner and the Q&A for StrengthCoach.com. Coach, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me as usual, Anthony. You know I love this.
All right. Well, let's get right into the meaty topic here. A lot of big words, which really, it's not really as hard as I thought. I was a little intimidated at first, but the topic of Stato Dynamic Training Method Implementation. It was somebody had posted the lecture from Val Nasedkin at the BSMPG workshop, and essentially it was an exercise that was consisting of 40 seconds and 40 seconds on and 40 seconds rest, the 30 to 60% of your 1RM. And it was basically working the slow twitch muscle fiber. And the question was, why would we do that? I'll throw in Charlie's post here, but why don't we start out with your thoughts on this?
My thoughts were actually, hey, I want to learn. Like, I had to go and actually watch the clip and say, okay, what's he really talking about? Because I always like, when the Stato Dynamic, like I'm like you, like too many big words. Sorry. So we're talking about slow tempo stuff to potentially, increase the hypertrophy of the fast, slow twitch muscle fibers. And my first thought was, do we really want to do that? And then, so I had to kind of go back. I will admit to being a little bit in the dark. And I think sometimes I feel that way a lot with some of these things in terms of they get too complicated. And it's like, well, I mean, I guess, I don't know. It's interesting. I just got back from about 10 hours in the car and I was listening to podcasts and I was listening. You got to get this kid on. Cam Josie is his name. He actually runs DeFranco's down in New Jersey, but really smart, young, 27 years old. But, not that he was talking about that particular subject, but it gets me wondering. Sometimes I think people overcomplicate this thing. And as I said, I think we end up doing this because when we have, say, an eccentric emphasis phase or a slower tempo phase, we are doing this. So I think like many things that we've talked about in the past, we've probably done this by accident, but not with any particular intent and more with the goal of, okay, let's, you start thinking about, let's insert some variety. You start thinking about the triphasic idea. You start thinking about all these different things. And and they all kind of seem to cross over in the same place because we want to get some eccentric emphasis, or we want to get some isometric emphasis. We want to do, whatever that is. So I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if I would put a lot of time or energy into that, but I do think if you're talking about one phase, out of 12 weeks where you're doing some, and again, you start thinking a lot of times when people say hypertrophy training, which again, I have my own opinions about hypertrophy training, but you're talking about base phase stuff, 8 to 10 reps. If you slow that tempo down a little bit, and even if you're thinking, just, hey, control it on the way up, control it on the way down, you're probably going to get somewhere around, you might get near that 40-second mark. So you may get some of this slow twitch fiber hypertrophy.
Yep. And before I talk about Charlie's answer, which I think Charlie did a great job here, Cameron Joss is actually going to be at the Pro Coaches Clinic in New York City on
awesome.
December 20th. Yeah, he's going to be the 1080. 1080 Motion is one of our sponsors, and he's going to actually just say a couple words about 1080 Motion, and he'll be there to kind of, so if we have any questions for him as well in the Q&A, it'll be fun. But Charlie wrote, increasing the size of slow twitch muscle fibers accomplishes overall increase in mitochondria, which are a larger proportion in the slow fibers. The trade-off is the notion of train slow, be slow. Where this phase is placed, particularly in rehab, fits into a much larger picture where if you're trading work capacity and aerobic function in exchange for functional speeds and power, you know what you're getting into and getting out of. That being said, I've seen vertical jump actually go up after an 8-week phase of 2020, and the explanation is probably similar to that of how easy strength leads to bigger numbers. It's just a long, active recovery, which I think more people can use that we care to even admit. Some other things to consider are using lightweight and slow controlled movement is more of a constrained learning environment to dial in certain lifts. I think we also have some reason to get away with partial reps here, as we're not training the motion, but more so the tissue are set up for the full reps and legit movements. Although you don't love the partial reps, but it's only, like you said, it has its place in a small piece of the pie.
Exactly. And you're right. I mean, it was a really good answer by Charlie, with the exception, I said, I intensely dislike partial reps because it's really hard. Whenever you let somebody, it's funny because I was listening to Cam talk on the podcast, and we've said this before, I think of how prejudiced and set in my ways I am based on my experiences. Because one of the things I always like to say, I started writing this idea, is that we fight human nature for a living. And so we're always trying to get people to do things right, to squat deeper, to bench, get the bar all the way down to their chest. All the things that people do to cheat are decreased range of motion techniques. They don't do their chin-ups all the way up and all the way down. They don't bring the bar down to their chest. They don't, like as we said, they don't squat low enough. So whenever anybody says do partial reps, I'm like, no, don't do. You're giving somebody a license to cheat, and then you're gonna really, whatever, get the genie back in the bottle, get the toothpaste back in the tube, whatever term you want to use. You always have trouble correcting that from a human nature standpoint, where suddenly you say to somebody, oh, we're not going to do it that way anymore. And then they look at you and think, oh, but that's harder. I don't like that. So I think in that particular situation, that would be my only kind of disagreement. And it's the same way I don't like people 1.5 reps. There's a lot of things you could do probably to get this type of, effect, continuous tension, don't lock out, all these things. But I don't like them because I feel like from a human nature standpoint, they encourage people to do what I don't want them to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Let's move on to, I thought this was interesting, helping the 6'3", 300-pound high school lineman get leaner. The guy wanted some advice. The parents wanted their son to get quicker in his senior year. And, he felt like, obviously he needed to get a little bit leaner. And that was, so it went into this nutrition talk. But what I think people often miss, and I think I love that, this is where you were talking about, you kind of picked up on this, yeah, the kid's in high school, he's eating like crap, but you got to start with the parents. And Elspeth brought it up. The kid's not shopping for the family. And I always say this about losing weight anyway. If you're married and you're doing one thing and your wife's not doing, or your husband's not doing it, it's very hard to be on the same path, especially with nutrition. Talk to us about this approach to helping these kids and working with the parents to help kids improve their habits.
Well, that's because this is something that we do all the time, and I 100% agree. I mean, Elspeth always, I complimented her on another thread, saying, she always has this sort of the nice, intelligent answer. And it's like, this kid he's not doing the food shopping at home. And I've had these conversations with parents where they're like, well, he really likes chicken fingers and French fries. And I'm like, I always tell them, like, if he liked, Jack Daniels and cocaine, you wouldn't give him that. So why, because he likes chicken fingers and French fries, you decided that that's okay. And, and then people say, oh, it's not the same thing. I'm like, I know it's not the same thing. It's an absurd example of the same thing. And if you want this result, if you're putting in the time, you've gone and you've met it. I'm pretty sure it's Vincent is the coach's name that's on the form. You've gone, you've met with the coach, you've brought him there. You've got a kid who obviously at least he has the thing you can't teach. He has size. But I always think, I used to say this all the time, but human nature, I said, you can lead a horse to water, and then sometimes you got to grab it by the friggin' head and shove it in the water. It's like people say you can't make them drink. Yeah, you can. Maybe you can't actually with horses, but you know what I mean? With kids, you can force it on them a little bit. Maybe not every day. And that's where, like I was saying, pick a habit. Because again, they say, he doesn't drink soda. And then I started thinking, as soon as he said, all right, I should have said sugary beverages, because the fact that the kid doesn't get to drink Coke doesn't necessarily resolve him, if he's having, because we had this problem. I had an NHL guy one time who was really struggling to get his weight down. And we used, at that time, we were playing around with one of these computerized diet analysis things. And we, input all his calories, everything in. And what we realized is he was drinking. He didn't drink alcohol, but he was drinking about 1,500 calories a day between, Gatorade and orange juice and, iced tea. And, when you started adding all that stuff up, you realized, wow, this guy, we've got his nutrition dialed in perfectly, but we don't have the beverage piece dialed in perfectly. I always said, like, for me, if I gave up beer, I'd be like 120. I'd have no problem. I would have probably disappeared by now.
Yeah.
It's a big form of caloric support for me. But you've got to be able to look at this stuff in a really, I think, in a realistic sense. And that was what I kept trying to bring Vincent around to. He's like, oh, I'm going to have him put cucumbers in his water. I'm like, no high school kid is putting cucumbers in his water. Do you know what I mean? Like this, you've got to, you have to keep reminding yourself that these are high school kids, and that literally, if we can just get him to stop drinking Gatorade, to stop having chicken fingers and French fries, to stop having, 3 bowls of cereal in the morning with a glass of orange juice, it's like, breakfast is the diabetes buffet for most kids. And just think, okay, if we can get any one of those changes to stick, it's the same thing. My son doesn't like breakfast. Again, you didn't come in here and ask me to talk about what your kid likes. Yeah. What you came in here to was to ask about how we're going to improve his performance. So, get up, make a protein shake. That's like I said, there's a good compromise. Make a protein shake, get some chocolate flavored, buy the BioSteel chocolate. It tastes really good. You can make a great chocolate protein shake for him in the morning, and he's going to be happy. It's going to be sweet. It's going to be chocolatey, but it's also going to be loaded with protein. You can go out to the store. You can do exactly what I do, buy some, sugar-free Metamucil and dump it in there. You can buy some, powdered greens. There's so many things you can do to try to improve somebody's nutrition and still make it relatively palatable. So.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, one of the things that you were talking about as well was just, number one, don't try to change 8 things all at once too. And, people sometimes think, we are talking about a high school kid here too. So we're trying to remember that, look, we're trying to instill habits. It might not be the same for an adult who after 6 to 8 weeks, those things worked. You change some habits and then they're going to start to plateau. Then you can get more advanced, but we're talking about starting to change these habits.
But if you think about John's system about precision nutrition, even for adults, it's the same system. It's the idea of, make change, build on this,
yes.
Build a habit, build another habit, build another habit. Don't try to build 8 habits. And if you read Power of Habit, if you read any of these books, it's all the same thing in terms of you've got to pick, okay, let's pick the biggest, let's pick the elephant in the room here, which again, for me, for the kids, it's probably beverages. So let's try to deal with that. Like, and I go through it again. I've got a 12-year-old, and it's a constant battle. He's always like, why do I always get cramps? Why am I always sore? I'm like, you won't drink water. You want, every place we go, you want to get a Pepsi, you want to get a Coke, you want to get, and we're trying to limit him to one soda a day. We go to the restaurant and he's like, the lady comes back with the refill and he sucks it down before we can say he can't have it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's all that stuff. It's like, this is kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, with adults, is it any different? Adults who can't stop. I got a friend who struggles to lose weight, but he loves good beer. Like he won't drink a Coors Light. And I'm like, you can literally have twice as many Coors Lights as you can have, what Sam Adams or, Oktoberfest or whatever it is. Yeah. But even as adults, people won't do it.
It's so true. Yep. Agreed. Coach, this was a good one. Surprisingly, came from Abby, our question guru. He wanted to know about hamstring injury, return to strength exercise. And I think this is a great question because the hamstring is so it's one of those things, if anybody like not even pulls it all the way, but hurts it, they don't want to do anything. Talk to us about your protocol for getting people back into return to strength exercises with the hamstring. And, a reminder that you had said, I think anyone with hamstring issues should be doing slide board leg curls, but probably not right away.
Right. And as I said, should be doing some glute work. And he said, well, I do these glute activation exercises. And I was like, no, we're talking about sort of a shoulder elevated hip lift. And I threw the video of that up there with resistance. So basically the single leg version of what people like, I'm not a hip thrust fan, but if we think of the single leg version of that, shoulders on a bench kind of thing, because again, in the hamstring, we've had a bunch of articles, a bunch of threads, a bunch of stuff. It's complicated in the sense that the hamstring is a secondary hip extensor. And when it gets hurt, it's an indication that something else is not right. So if you spend too much time trying to fix the hamstring, you haven't solved the problem. And I think that's what we've got to get people to understand is that we need to solve the problem. We need to solve the problem of hip extension and the inability. So you start getting into, one leg straight leg deadlift and getting that muscle strong in that pattern. Hip lift, getting the muscle strong in that pattern, adding in the leg curl, but the slide board leg curl or a stability ball leg curl, not a machine type leg curl. It's all, and then there's kind of the return to movement piece. I don't know if I linked to Boosh Next Data's article, but I asked him if he had read the articles that were on there. I think that morning I didn't have enough time to insert all the links, but I love Boo's hamstring thing because Boo's like, well, if you can walk without pain, then you're going to jog. And if you can jog without pain, then you're going to do strides. If you can do strides without pain, then you're going to start to do tempo.
Yeah.
It's like, it's so simple. You read it and think, yeah, that's basically what you're going to do. And I always say hamstring, any muscle strain rehab is really about a velocity continuum. Okay, we've got to bring back this element of velocity because no one pulls their hamstring jogging. You pull your hamstring sprinting. And so trying to get that person back to sprinting, trying to get that person keep getting that muscle comfortable with velocity and, gradual, as like Boo said, from walking to jogging to, kind of to striding to tempo to, whatever, 75%, 80% sprinting. In some ways it's really, really simple. And in other ways, I think the thought process can be complicated for people because in the conventional therapy world, we're kind of shown to rehabilitate the hamstring, go after the hamstring. And I always think it's like looking at, it's like looking at the front of your car getting smashed in when someone hits you from behind and you hit somebody in front of you, it's like, well, what happened?
Yeah.
My headlight's broken. But what happened? Like somebody hit me from behind, going 30 miles an hour. You've got to be able to see kind of cause and effect here and not just get focused on what the effect was.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we talk about, you had said it, and this is what I was alluding to, I'd be very careful as any soreness in the hamstring from lifting can can be perceived as bad and as a re-injury. You got to remind them that they're going to be sore as they would normally would from strength work, but where you're going to seek to minimize it.
And that's true. And that's one of the things we always talk about, the idea there's a difference between soreness and your pain. And I think that's one of the things you've got to get people in almost all rehab situations. When you start people working again, it's like you're going to be sore. And I mean, that's a big one too with back pain. People are like, oh, it hurts my back. Like, yeah, but is it your pain? Is it the reason that you came here? Is it what you were complaining about, or is it something else? And most people are like, oh, it's not the same thing, but it hurts. And it's like, yeah, if you work muscles, those muscles are going to have, there's going to be an effect. There's going to be some, we don't want obviously horrible delayed onset muscle soreness, but you're going to have that feeling of I did something, and that's going to be problematic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coach, mentally prepared.
Yeah. Let's finish up with this. Kevin Carr posted the video of the medicine ball target training. And one of the things that I've done for a long, working with golfers, I don't have the higher targets, but I've always had them throw low. So you have an X probably about a foot off the ground, it looks like. That's where I always had my golfers throwing the ball, the side throws, to it reinforces them staying down, which movement of their hips on like a hip extension in the swing, it will be is a swing fault, one of the swing characteristics that are not good. So this promotes them staying down. Give us your reasons for doing some of this target throwing, because I assume this is relatively new for you.
Actually, no, we've been doing it for we've probably had those X's on the wall for 3 years.
Okay.
And it's basically the idea that I think you're going to have, as you go down, it's kind of like with pitching off the mound, throwing down is going to produce more stress than throwing. So if I decide to throw at head height, obviously I'm not going to throw with the same intensity or velocity. And I always think like there's a big decelerative component. When you release that ball, all of your posterior shoulder muscle has to go into deceleration. I always said, like, otherwise, if you threw the ball and your posterior shoulder didn't work, your arms would basically like make a big circle and then come back to where they were. You know what I mean? Like everything would look like a window, like, whoop, like it went around in a circle.
Yeah.
They don't do that. It's like, boom, they stop. So the further downhill you go, the more stressful it is. So I think that's the major reason that we did it from our standpoint. And also, but it's, it's giving kids like, okay, side throw, we want to be middle. We want to be throwing at a waist-high target. We don't want to be throwing down low. Overhead, we may have a choice. Overhead, depending on what kind of stress we want, we may say to somebody, hey, I just want you to go, right off the wall, sort of hand height, or I want you to come down at that waist-high target, or maybe I'm going to be really far away now, thinking more pitching motion, and I'm going to be really stepping in and driving it down at that bottom X. And realizing that each one of those is going to be a little bit of a change in stress, a little bit of an increase in stress as you work your way down the wall.
Very cool. All right, good stuff. Well, that'll do it for the Strength Coach podcast portion of today. So, Coach, thanks for coming on. Looking forward. I think this is probably the last time that we'll record before the Pro Coaches Clinic that I need to, December 20th in New York City at Body Space Fitness. But yeah, really looking forward to that. And so from the listener's perspective, it's still time to get in on that. And
my problem with that is that the organizer just put a lot of pressure on me to get my presentation done by Saturday. So that's going to be.
No, I just want the 5 questions. I don't want
to have the presentation done in order to have the 5 questions. I can't go backwards. So I got to get the presentation. I got to figure out, I got to take, 130 slides and make them into 40 or whatever it was.
That's something new for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, Coach, thanks.
I'm just thinking about doing the whole clinic. I'm going to just talk the whole time.
There you go. 4 hours. There you go. All right. All right. Hey, everybody. Want to remind you that Perform Better's having their holiday sale right now. 30 to 50% off selected items. So many things are on sale. They got about 4 pages of stuff on the site. Check it out at performbetter.com. Also, while you're there, the lineups for the one-day seminars have been announced. So we got Gray Cook, Robert Dos Remedios, Josh Henkin, and Brandon Marcello in New Jersey on January 13th. Remember, you can check them out at performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars.
Hi, I'm Eric Agati, and this is the Functional Movement Systems segment. This is the third in a three-part series that I call the Power of Three. The Power of Three is the on-your-feet athletic training system that I use that is a progression of the functional movement system where we start with the SFMA if someone is in pain. If not, then we start with the FMS. And within the FMS, the three tests we do on your feet are the inline lunge, the hurdle step, and the squat, which is our 3 foot positions. We're either in a staggered or lunge type position, we're in a single leg stance, or we're in an open stance. From there, what we do is we look at the different phases of movement, whether you're accelerating, decelerating, or amortizing, where you're transitioning between the two, or the third piece where we're looking at direction of movement, front and back, side to side, or rotational/diagonal. Now that we've gathered the information that we collected in the second segment of this series in what we call our ready to play test, now what we're going to look at is how do you actually train it. So let's look at some of the things that we may find as faults that we want to address. So let's say if someone has an issue with controlling themselves on a single leg. When we look at a single leg, the things most commonly seen is we see pronation and collapsing of the foot, which is coupled with the knee diving in, and where you see that total pronation pattern of everything collapsing in almost a lower cross type syndrome in the lower half. Well, that is going to come from 2 different places primarily. It's going to come from number 1, pelvic position, and what I like to call the first of our 2 arches. And what the drill is that I'll do to make someone understand this is have them learn what posterior and anterior tilting is of their pelvis, and then have them find their neutral. And just by doing a little bit of perturbation and poking around on them, what they'll find is when they get into that neutral position, that they're much more solid, that they can start to access and recruit the things that they need to be able to stabilize and stay strong. And that's because of the length-tension relationships and how the architecture of our musculature is set up, and that we're in the best position to create force when we're in that neutral position. So the first thing we got to find is a neutral pelvis. The next thing we're to find is a neutral foot, and that's the second of what I always call our 2 arches. If that foot pronates in or over-supinates, it can't really grab the ground, which is a cue I use quite often. When they can grab the ground, that'll help stick, that'll stabilize the lower limb, and then if the hip stabilizes, that'll then stabilize the femur, which will in turn keep the knee in line. Moving up from there, if you keep a good neutral lumbar spine, it generally will lead to a good positioning of the T-spine and the head, and that's the alignment that we're looking for. Again, the cue I'll always give is I want you in a position that you could sprint in any direction out of. So if we get you in an athletic stance, and that athletic stance could be in a single leg, staggered, or open position, that means that there's a neutral foot, neutral pelvis. There's a slight bend in the knee. That doesn't mean bent or squat. It's a slight bend. And the best way I describe that is if you had to sprint instantaneously right now, would you have to go down to do it? Would you have to go up to do it? Or are you right in the position you need to be to go? That's when we know you have you in a good neutral athletic position. From there, we will challenge that in a single leg with some hop outs and teaching you how to sync those things up, eventually then leading you into a breakdown position in your staggered stance. But let's talk about single leg first. In your single leg position, if we should do a hop out, you hop from your right foot to your left, whether it's in the front and back plane, side to side, or rotation. What I want to look for is from the time your foot hits the ground to the time when you stabilize and own that position, I want that to be as little as possible. The longer that takes, the longer you're going to have in your amortization. The amortization is going to be the changeover from deceleration into acceleration. So now that we're decelerating, the sooner that I can find and own that neutral position, the sooner I can now transition that back into acceleration. And so I always say the people who make the most plays are not the ones who create the most speed, it's the ones who give away the least. So I want to have that amortization period to be as short as possible. Then from there, we go into your staggered stance. Your staggered stance now, if we look into a breakdown lunge position, here what I'm looking for is what I call your donut of power. Your donut of power means if you were to draw a circle around you and anything outside that circle is too wide of a base, you have great stability, but you can't really produce any force out of there. Then if you drew another smaller circle inside that, and anything inside that circle is too small of a stance, too short of a stance, and you can't really stabilize within there, that donut that's left in between where you're in your strong power angles position, that's going to be what we call your donut of power. And I'm always coaching the athletes to land inside that donut. So now we're going to break down in a staggered stance. And then eventually we got to learn how to transition that, where we're going to learn to drop the hips and drop them just enough to create a rebound effect where we can transition, amortize, and be able to move into a different direction. We won't do as much in an open stance because, as I said in an earlier segment, it's a position you're in very rarely as an athlete out in the field, but we will add elements of that. And then from there, it's just a matter of adding different drills, single leg, staggered, and open, depending on what sport the athlete plays, what position they play, and what most encompasses their environment. From there, we're going to go to more program drills where we'll say, okay, I want you to go to that cone, break down, decelerate, and then reaccelerate to this next cone. And then ultimately, where we want to get you to is where there's a reactive component. And that's a whole nother layer. And you are not really ready and truly prepared to go out and move athletically unless you've added a reactive component. Because regardless of what sport you have, whether you're reacting to a tennis shot, a fly ball in the outfield, or you're trying to track somebody down and make a tackle, everything you're doing at that point is reactive. And there can't be conscious contracting of this muscle or that muscle. And really what we need for that stuff to happen is happen instantaneously and being able to own that neutral position. So the last piece we'll get to is reactive training, keeping all of our foundation of our 3 fifth positions, our 3 phases of movement, and our 3 directions of movement. And that's how we build our on your feet training program, or what some people often call is their speed and agility. Just we have a system for it. For more information, make sure you check out functionalmovementsystems.com. Once again, my name is Eric DeGatti. Thank you for listening.
Hello, it's Rachel Cosgrove with Results Fitness University on the Business of Fitness segment at the Strength Coach podcast. And today, I have talked to you guys about numbers before. We've talked finances, we've talked setting financial goals, and whether you're doing that or not, I wanted to revisit that to really make sure that you have looked at, okay, what are my numbers? Where are my goals? What am I making? But not only that, today I really want to shift and talk about the honesty and transparency that I think is important to share with your team. I think a lot of owners, leaders don't think, they don't want to, maybe they keep it a secret. They don't, tell their team about how much money they're making or where the money's going, or, so it's good to have these candid, honest, and open conversations with your team and really get them on board with the business and really help them to understand, hey guys, here's our goal. Here's how much we're making. A great question to ask your team at one of your next team meetings is, how much do you guys think it takes to run this gym? And a lot of them have no idea. They have no idea how much your expenses are. They have never thought about it. They have, all they think about is, if their paycheck or did I get paid? And so it really starts to give them that bigger picture of, hey, we're all in this together. We're a team. And, this is how much it costs to turn on the lights, to pay the rent, to, market, to do all the things we need to do to keep this company going. Just base operating expense, this is what it cost us. And if you give them that number, a lot of times, they have never thought about that. They're going to throw out and ask the question at a team meeting and let them answer. Try to be quiet and try to, as best you can, not give them the answer, because it is interesting to hear, their perspective and hear, they don't know what all you have on your plate. But when they do start to understand that, wow, okay, this gym costs, whatever in your situation it is, let's say it's, $30,000 to run every month or whatever, it might be, they're probably going to throw out numbers like, $4,000 or, which is, probably not even going to pay their payroll. So it's something for really to shift their mindset to help them look at that bigger picture of, hey, we're all in this as a team. I encourage you as an owner to start to be more honest and transparent and start to share your numbers. If you don't know your numbers, first figure out your numbers. But then second, start to share those numbers with your team and in a way that, it's really about getting everyone, if you have your entire team with a common goal, you all know where you're going. It's so much more powerful than if you keep things a secret and they don't understand how they can play or contribute into that bigger picture, or how they can contribute to what, you're trying to accomplish as a company. And so, that's been something we've always done. We have a whiteboard in the back that everyone can take a look at, and it's got our gross income goal on it, and it's got where we're at for the month and, what we're doing. And every year we do, divide up the pie, whatever, piece of the profit that the more profit we have, the bigger pieces of pie everybody gets. And so actually at our meeting this week, one of our team, we were talking numbers, and it was a very honest, we always talk honestly and transparently about our numbers and where we're at. And, we were talking about, hey, what does it mean if we have more profit, or what does it mean if, and it really, if you have a profitable company, if you have a financially successful company, it means you're helping more people. But he said, it means we get pied out. And I thought that was hilarious, because I was like, our team they know, hey, we're going to share this. Like, this isn't about me being a greedy business owner. This is about all of us really being a part of, this company and contributing and also benefiting from this company. So just something for you to think about. Start to be more honest and transparent with your numbers. Share them with your team. Don't keep them secret, because you can get them on board and really have them help you to accomplish even more. So try that out. All right, guys, have a great day. This is Rachel Cosgrove, ResultsFitnessUniversity.com.
All right, now it's time for the Hit the Gym with an elementary school teacher. No, I kid. I got Hit the Gym with the strength coach. I have on Mark Watts. He's a 5th grade school teacher and a U8 girls soccer coach in Columbus, Ohio. Formerly, he was the director of education at Elite FDS, and he was the host of the Elite FDS Sports Performance Podcast. He's worked with college athletes in over 20 different sports at Division 1, 2, and 3 levels for over 15 years as a strength and conditioning and or football coach at institutions such as Denison University, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, Allegheny College, and Clarion University. He played college football at Clarion. He's also competed in powerlifting, strongman, and Olympic weightlifting. He's also a USMC veteran. Coach, thanks for doing this.
Well, thank you for having me on, Anthony. I've been listening to you for a long time, and so I appreciate you having me on.
All right. Well, yeah, this is a long time coming. I told you before, sometimes when somebody else has a podcast, I'm like, they don't want to be on my show. So I should have, this should have happened a long time ago.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Believe me, I understand how it is.
All right. Well, I love a lot. I was just kind of going over some of your articles on Elite FTS. And, although you haven't been there for like a year or so, I think, some of this stuff about you training in the industry, this stuff has been going on for a while, and you make some just amazing arguments here for both in both areas. I want to talk about you training first. Especially, and we'll get to it because you have a different lens right now, being a teacher. You are still coaching. You're working with the U8 girls soccer, but we'll talk about that later. You've actually said, this is quoting you, like the youth sports industry right now is kind of deplorable in your opinion, and we all know early specialization, longer seasons, parental involvement. Those are some of the ones that I think are we talk about a lot. But you were talking about the emphasis on an outcome instead of a process, and I don't think this is talked about enough. But that being said, I want you to go over this concept and talk to us about your thoughts on how we can change this, because this is easier than, we should talk about all the lessons we can give them. But when little Johnny's over there and his friend Steve is going to hockey camp and he's going in the morning to stick time, or he has a private batting coach, it's hard because the kid's looking at that as well, and you're trying to teach them things. Talk to us about this idea first about outcome instead of the process.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I do think we are, like you mentioned, we're to a point where that is going in the right direction. I think the one issue that I think we have is that the people that are directly interacting with these young people from a training standpoint, the private sector and whatnot, I think they understand. They understand the model that we should be at least aspiring to get to. And I think the problem that happens, and I think it's the same for a lot of different phases in the strength and conditioning industry with youth sports, is the people that are driving that are driving the train are the ones that are actually paying the money. And I think at the end of the day, if you're training youth athletes, whether it's be club sports, whether it be even young at the JV level or at the private sector, I think you are still have to answer to you're the customer, because it is still a business. And I think the problem is that most of these, athletes that train from a sports performance standpoint are still going to train in the private sector. And, unfortunately, as a strength and conditioning coach or sports performance coach, you're not the one that dictates, what, all those little ins and outs, because at the end of the day, it's going to be mom or dad that's going to have the final say, at least at first, on when those kids train, how important that is to train. And, it's funny because, when I was basically helping out in what the gyms that I lived at, you sometimes you overhear these conversations. And I think the trainers I see, I think they get it. They understand. The people that don't get it are the people that really don't have to get it because they're writing the checks. And that's a lot of times the parents. And I hear this, the one woman walked in and she asked about, the trainer that'll train her son. And the first thing she asked was, did you make him puke? And it's like, I was like, wait a minute, why would I want that to happen? But again, it's one of those things where they look at what they feel is going to be the final, process. Did I make that, person tired? And they feel that is the end all to be all, and that is the outcome that should happen. And I think that they don't step back and take the time and look and see. And I think a lot of times, sports performance coaches are in a tough situation because, at the end of the day, I can train a kid, I can train a 12-year-old kid, improve their vertical, several inches, improve all their max times, their shuttle times, all these different performance indicators. They can be improved. But at the end of the day, what if the kid's just not very good at his sport? What if the kid is not the best, because at the end of the day, and you see this, it probably is more exaggerated in certain sports, but you see that if you have a kid that is just more talented and more skilled in the actual specific sports preparation and he's not maybe as physically prepared as kid B, well, that kid's still going to play because he just has more talent. And that's the one thing that sometimes as sports performance coaches, we want that improvement to be on the field. So we either have two choices. We either can step outside of our scope of practice, right, and start to talk about some things that, hey, we're saying that the kid needs better leg strength and better, explosiveness, better lateral speed, whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, what the kid may just really need is just more practice at his specific sport. And it's different because, again, there's some sports they can play year round. If you get a high school football player, besides some 7-on-7 stuff, I mean, they got 10 to 12 to 13 games if they're successful. A lot of kids have 10 games, and that's all they got. They might have a 7-on-7 scrimmage, so they have whatever it may be, 12 weeks to work on their specific sport, and that might be what they need. They've just you got a kid that just can't he just can't cover the flat route. You might have improved his first step. You might have improved his leg strength. He may change the direction much better. But at the same time, there's still that technical and tactical aspect that is, in a sense, outside of our control as sports performance coaches. So I think that's the one thing to get parents back on the right track, or club sport coaches, whoever it may be that you're answering to, back on the right track to say, like, this is what we control and this is the process that we're trying to make. And I think at the same time, you have to be able to speak coach talk enough to say, if we do this, they potentially can do this on the field better or on the court. Their court performance should be better based on their golf swing, should be better based on these performance indicators. But at the end of the day, you use it as an analogy as an artist. Like, my job is to make the canvas bigger. My job is to get you more paints, more colors of paint, so you can. But at the end of the day, you got to give that paintbrush and the canvas to the sport coach, because that's the final product that they're trying to see. And I think, and again, not to jump around here, Anthony, but the other thing is, we as sports performance coach have to be very careful about what we take credit for in that whole process. Because if you are saying that because I work with this young man or young woman and now they are all conference because of me, because of my training, 2 days a week at my facility, well, then every kid that I trained that didn't make varsity, that didn't make all conference, that didn't get a scholarship to college, then I better be able to say it's my fault they didn't make it as well. And I don't think too many sports performance coaches are willing to say that. I don't think they're willing to say, hey, I'm very proud of this young person for getting a scholarship to so-and-so. In an indirect way, it is marketing, it's selling themselves, it's what they have to do to stay in business. But at the end of the day, I think you have to be very cautious about what you're taking credit for.
Yeah.
And I think, from my standpoint, if it's because of the strength coach that you won the game, then it's because of the strength coach that you lost the game, or vice versa, whatever it may be. So I think that's the one thing that we have to stay in our scope and keep communicating, and just understand that, at the end of the day, those perceptions we can't control. All we can do from the sports performance standpoint is do the best job that we can in the environment that we control.
Yeah, part of the problem with that being said, and you're right, but some of these programs prey on, like you said, the drivers are paying the money, right? So you have to answer to the customer. And so some of these coaches are kind of preying on the parents, because they're like, hey, if you send your kid here, I'm going to increase their vertical jump, which means they are going to be better in basketball no matter what. And then there's the delicate balance, because like you said, the parents don't get it. And then they said, okay, well, Steve's going over to Coach Watts, and he increases vertical jump. Meanwhile, Steve's playing maybe a couple of sports, and he has a better approach to the game. But then there's also this balance of, okay, we're saying they need more practice, but now we're also saying we don't want them to get too much practice, right? Because we don't want them just specializing in one thing all year round. So it's really hard. But also, as a business owner, you see these programs, these kind of, stronger, faster, better programs, and, they kind of based on all of these metrics, but, it's not always the only thing. But as a business owner, you're trying to kind of compete in there. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying this is what happens. And a few people start saying, oh, well, yeah, we can get your kid, we can do this or we can do that. I think that's part of the problem as well. We have to make sure that we have integrity.
Right. Exactly. And I think, I think it comes back to it's some of the same problems in the private sector are mirrored to the problems in specifically the collegiate and high school strength and conditioning. Is that it's really hard for me to objectively say that trainer A down the street is better than trainer B based on what? Based on their testing numbers? Well, I can test some athletes to really get some improvements, and I can, and that happens, a lot. I can fudge those numbers or manipulate those variables in those testing performance indicators to make it so that those testing numbers are going to be off the charts. I can manipulate that any way I want to, but really at the end of the day, there's not a lot of objective measures that you can say, okay, this sports performance place down the street is better than this performance place because of what? Because of this? Because of how many scholarship kids they have? Well, what if they were just better, better players? I mean, and it's one of those things that I think that's part of the problem that adds into all this, is that really it's going to still come down to, personal preference. There's a lot of big time strength and conditioning coaches that continue to have jobs because of the trust level they have with the head football or basketball coach. Let's not lie. And it's going to be very similar when you have, a parent, and they want their child to train with a certain person. It's still going to come down to trust, and they're going to manipulate whatever their perception is based on how they feel. And it goes back to, again, their beliefs are based on behavior, not their behavior based on their beliefs. And they kind of, they have to somehow, some way, Anthony, justify, I'm paying this much money for this product, for this service, and it is going to make a difference, and I'm going to make sure it does, because now I look like, as a parent, someone who incompetent, and I didn't do what's best for my child because I just paid a lot of money for my child not to get better at their sport. And I think sometimes that's where some animosity comes into as well.
Yeah, but how do we educate or almost measure this idea of the process? How do we educate the parents on the process? And how do we, like you said, part of the problem is there's no measurement. There's no, what are you basing it off of? How do we do that?
Yeah, that's the question I think that that I've asked myself so many times. I think there's a lot of trainers out there that ask themselves the same thing. And I think it is getting better. I think at the same time, I think one thing that social media has done, number one, it has been good for now. The information is out there. There's no, if I'm a dad and I'm saying, you know what, I want my 10-year-old daughter to start training because she's really getting serious about this certain sport. There's not a lack of information out there. The problem is that my filter on what information I can access is based on my education and experience levels. And again, and it's also going to be based on my personal preference. So the problem with that being, there's not a lack of information. There's just a lack of filter of that information. The one thing that social media, I think, has done, the good thing is that it's got the information out there. The second thing is that we're in a situation where, when you put it out there, you also put it out there for people to look at and really critique. And I think sometimes we as coaches, for whatever reason, because we're really emotionally invested in what we do from a training standpoint, I think sometimes you look at it and we can really turn from, being constructive to critical, all the way to cynical really quick. And I think that's, sometimes, that's when you get some people that control. And sometimes people don't know who is commenting, who's not. But one thing is done, regardless of who comments or regardless of what feedback you get, it's really made it so that if I'm going to put this out there, I'm going to have a 1.5 minute clip on my training so I can promote my business and I can get people here and I can somewhat educate parents in our basic process. I think, the number one thing that has to happen is I'm not going to put anything out there on the internet that I feel people are going to look at and say, listen, this is right, this is wrong, because the problem with that is that it's based on the situation. The first thing you see when you see someone training somebody, like, why would they do that? That's a question that if you were at, if I'm on the internet, all of a sudden I can ask it a certain way. But if I'm at the bar, we're having a few beers and I want to ask you, hey, I saw that. Why do you do that? It changes the whole dynamic and the whole conversation. I think so. It goes back to looking at some of the things that I don't think that I think that sometimes coaches do things to make parents impressed with what they do. They get out the agility hours, and I think there's a place for them, but they do things that, whatever it may be that people see, and they do some, all of a sudden you grab some chains and bands and you have all these different things, and maybe parents are connected with that. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the athlete and the kid themselves. And I think at the first and foremost, to me, I think it comes down to, no matter what you do as a coach, it always comes down to humility, it comes down to empathy, and it comes down to authenticity. And I think no matter what stage you are in your life and no matter what job you have, it comes down to those three. And I think that, people often talk about, because I think those three skills, those three attributes, those three characteristics are what every other characteristic is based off of. And again, if you're not humble, if you're not authentic, and humble doesn't mean you don't think, it doesn't mean you think less of yourself. It means, you think of yourself less. And what you're doing is not trying to promote yourself, but try to get these young people to reach their goals. So if you have that humility, you have that empathy, you understand what this kid's going through, right? You understand that dad's dropping him off, for the third time this week, but the kid's got baseball hitting lessons. The kid's in the middle of basketball season. And the kid's, has to do, is in a school play and all these other things. So if you have empathy for that kid and you understand, you're going to train that kid better, because you're not going to say, okay, I want this dad impressed with what I'm doing. I'm going to say, you know what, I want what's best for this kid. And right now, this is the third time I've seen you. You have a game tomorrow, and I know dad wants you better. But guess what? Me training you, all out today is not going to be what's best for you. We all know that as coaches, but all of a sudden when you're able to, and I think it comes back to, if I really believe in what I'm doing and I really believe that what I'm doing is right, then it's easy to communicate. What happens is when it's hard for coaches to communicate their values and their vision when it's not authentic to them. when you're trying to say, okay, I think this is what they want to hear, instead of, hey, this is what they need to hear. And I think you might lose some kids. You might lose some kids down the street to the other coach that says that's fudging numbers. And I think that's okay. That might be one of those things. I don't want coaches to be out of business. But if you're in business for being a coach that you're really not, I mean, what's the use of being a coach that you never wanted to be? Why would you sell your soul just so you can get, Johnny and his couple friends, to train with you? And I think that's really one of the things that it comes down to, is it's hard because there's no direct answer. Yeah. But all these buzzwords that come up, just kind of, they fall short because at the end of the day, if they don't have substance, it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah, it's so true. You're right. You have to stay true to who you are, because I remember training this young hockey player, 12 years old, and we would start to do some workouts. And then, I always try to, go, hey, listen, Dante, what do you have? When's your next practice? You go tomorrow? Oh, what do you have in school? And I would shape the workout, like whether or not we ended up playing a little bit of horse with the basketball, or playing some street hockey in the gym, or another game that I made up called hall ball. But we did that, and sometimes I thought, oh man, his dad is going to be like, what are you guys doing? But for me, we got in our what we needed, and we had a great time. And I knew he wanted to come back, and I knew he was going to be able to go to practice that night or the next day and feel really good. But I stayed strong to what I believed in. And I think I love that you said that, because I think that's the important part. Now, here's the other piece. We'll segue this into the parents, their piece. And you wrote about, I guess Brad Griffin wrote, the only 6 words parents need to say about their kids about sports or any performance. And I wanted you to go over this because I love it. Jim Kielbasa was the first one I heard say this to me, about the best thing that you can say to your kids is, I love to watch you play. And that's great. But how many times can you say it, before they're like, all right, Dad, enough. I know you said that, but there's other derivatives of it. Talk to us about how we're speaking to the kids about before and after competition.
Well, yeah, I think one of the things that article came up, and like I said, I think, just being able to, John O'Sullivan was the guy that just, I've interviewed before, and with the Changing the Game project, I think, with Brad's thing and what happens is, I think that is a basically contrary to the attitude of that communication with parents. The key thing is after the game, and just, instead of saying you need to do this better, you need to do that better. I think from that, it became a communication from parent to kid and kid to parent. And it was basically taking the context of it was say, okay, what am I going to talk to my kid about after the game? Because most kids, they're going to get in, they're going to put their headphones in, and they don't want to talk about the game. And I think that's the one thing that you can say, and again, to get it away from, you don't want to ruin the sport for a kid at age 10, and in ruined form for the rest, because they just can't stand it anymore. So that quote, I think, was really for that conversation that happens between parents and kids. But what you're talking about is when it goes further than that. Okay, I love seeing you play. I hope you have fun. At the same time, I mean, I've been coaching. I watch. My wife is coaching U10 basketball right now, and she has. My daughter is one of only 2 girls I've ever played before. And so, these girls, and I end up, I'm the one at the games, because I'm watching my 2-year-old, my 5-year-old, whatever they're doing, and so I'm kind of keeping an eye, and I'm listening to parents, and I'm listening to parents kind of get frustrated. I'm like, these girls are just learning how to play the game. Like, the number one goal, for someone playing that young is like, are they going to play next year? If the answer is yes, then you're doing something. And again, with our we had the same situation with we would I think we scored 2 goals all year, and because we just didn't have that talent. And it was at some point you get to the point where, like, okay, I understand we're having no, we're not having fun because we're losing 12-0,
Yeah.
So it's not fun anymore. Like, so you have to sit there and all of a sudden you have to switch it to go back to the parents to say, okay, what do we control? If there really is something, do you really believe in your heart that your daughter or your son is not the best player on their team because of my coaching? Are you really are you thinking that if they had a better sports performance personal trainer, that they would actually be the best person on our team? Do you really, really believe that? When the kid in the middle of the game is doing circles or, cartwheels, we just, you reward the kids. If you have some girls, you're playing, youth sports and you have some girls on a team, and sometimes you reward them for not doing cartwheels in the middle of the game, or we would reward our girls for like not holding, thank you for not holding hands in the middle of the game. Like you have to really flip it. But at the same time, now you have to go back and you have to ask the kids like, okay, do you own a soccer ball at home? Are you playing basketball? How much are you dribbling in your basement? And we talked about it last night. It's like, my daughter got frustrated because she got the ball stolen off her because at a different ages they have different rules as far as defense. And the thing is like here's the answer. Are you dribbling with your left hand every night? Like, and if the answer is no, and they're not going to get it at first. But at the same time, I think all of a sudden, and for a parent, you can't make your child do something that you're not going to do. You can't say, hey, listen, you need to take, 53 throws in the driveway when you're not out there with them taking just as many. So I think when you talk to parents about, again, what they need to do and what the process is, I don't think parents really know what the process is to begin with. I think the process is, hey, we play U8 and then we move up to U10 and we move to U12, and that's a process. That's not a process. That is the organization of the sport. That's not the process for which you get better. And I think that's part of it too. And I think that, at the end of the day, they have to understand that they are part of it too. And I think when you get to this situation where the kid is making the decision that they want to do something extra, right? That's when you're in a situation where, okay, they are going to be able to excel. And again, the other thing is that I think with most parents don't understand is that the best kid on the team, listen, when you're looking at U8, and again, even younger, U6, U8, U10, U12, you look at like take sports like, if you take a sport like hockey, it's probably the kid that can skate the best. It might not be the kid with the best stick skills. They might just be faster. And it's the same thing with basketball, and we got one kid that can dribble better than everybody else. They're going to be better. If you have one kid in soccer that is just more aggressive and they can run faster than everybody else. So some kid kicks the ball as far as they can. This kid's faster than everybody else. They catch up to the ball and they score. Are they really a better soccer player? And are they going to be a better soccer player if they continue to play like that when they become 14, 16 years old? And I think that's the question. I think you just can continue to have those conversations as much as possible. And I think that when it comes down to, I think most sports are understanding that, small-sided games and all the things that we already know. I think parents are starting to be on board. And I think it comes down to an open communication with those parents. And just, I used to write a newsletter to say, hey, listen, this is kind of what we're doing. This is what we're looking for. This is what you can do at home. If you choose not to do it, I can't do anything about that. But I'm telling you, this is kind of what the process looks like. And if they don't know what it looks like, then it's hard for them to get on board with that process.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Yeah, I agree 100%. Mark, what about, I think it's interesting. It's kind of like when I was originally thinking about you on the show and saying, wow, man, Mark must have such a different perspective now as a fifth grade teacher. Because you're getting a different lens. Before it was through the gym or as a dad, but now you're seeing other kids in a classroom. How has that experience, how's that changed the way you're looking at youth athletes and, not just athletes, but at kids, now that you're seeing them through a different lens in the classroom?
Yeah, it really gives you all the things you think right? You think you have all the answers, and then when you get into that profession, it's like, okay, no, I understand now. And I think it was very humbling for me. I think with the culture of youth, I think it transcends, to sports and to performance, and it's kind of all encompasses kind of the same basic culture. And the first thing I learned when I was trying to get back into teaching, was that it was very humbling. Here's the thing that you find. If you're a head strength and conditioning coach and you're interviewing at a high school, you're interviewing at a small college, you're interviewing, even if you're a head strength coach interviewing at a Division I school, in front of the AD or football coach. The thing about it is that when I interviewed, there's not a lot of people that I interviewed for, unless I was an assistant, interviewing with a head strength coach. But when you're interviewing in front of an AD or a principal or a head football coach, wherever it may be, you know more about your topic. You know more about your profession, your skill set than anybody else. You are the expert when you're interviewing. Now, when I started to take these teaching interviews, that was not the case. I was not at that same level as everybody else that was interviewing me. So it really changed. It changed it. And it kind of brought me back to when I interviewed for football positions when I was looking at, a D coordinator spot or whatnot. A lot of times the thing about sport performance is that you can get your way through with just talking about philosophy and just seeing if you're a good fit. But sometimes when you're in an interview, you could be answering questions that no one else is really going to know the answer to anyway. So that was the one thing that I had to it was really humbling and it was frustrating. I had a lot of rejection letters before I got into teaching, and because I just wasn't prepared. It wasn't anybody's fault but my own, because I had such a layoff of teaching, and I just wasn't, in the game with everything I needed to do. And I got lucky to actually, get involved. I think the big difference as sports performance coaches, we're always asking why. And I think even when I was fortunate enough to have all of the interns that I had, being a Denison, for 10 years, we were like right in the middle of, there was probably within a half hour, 45 minutes, there's 10 to 15, small colleges right there in Columbus, and so we would get interns from not only those schools, but also Ohio State and some other larger schools that would come and intern for us. And the one thing you always ask is like, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're going to set up this training program for this athlete. Tell me why. That's the number one question I think that every aspiring strength coach or every strength coach should be able to do, is to ask why. And again, anytime I was on, I've been fortunate enough to, when I interviewed at West Point, Corey Crane was one of the assistants. And I know that the one thing he asked me several times about several different topics was why. Okay, why do you do that? Why do you teach Olympic lift that way? Why do you incorporate Olympic lifts at the beginning? And you know what? The one thing I found is that the answer doesn't matter as long as you can justify why. This is why I'm doing it. Because when someone asks you why you're doing that, you're going to do one of three things. You're going to say, I have no idea. This is what I do. You're going to make something up, right? You're just going to BS yourself. Or you're really going to have to sit back and think of, okay, this is the rationale. Why I implement this? Why it's this week? Why do I teach it like this? Why I use these cues, and it's one of those things where you have to know that, and that's what separates, I think, some of the good strength coaches from some of the really top-notch strength coaches, is that they understand what questions to ask, and they're always asking why. I think when I got into education, everyone knew why. You know what I mean? Everyone knew why. Everyone knew why you did this because the research was out there. But in teaching, it was a little different. You ask how. Not saying that you need, there's different ways to teach how to teach athletes how to squat. There's different techniques to teach athletes how to change direction. Not saying that the how is not important in sports performance, but the why, I thought, superseded that. And I think in teaching, the how is the most important thing. I understand that I need to get all these kids to be reading at different levels, so I need to differentiate my instruction, and I need to be able to scaffold this for certain low-end readers, and I need to be able to do some challenging things for the kids that are a little higher. But the question is how? How do I do that with 25, 30 kids in one classroom, and I have reading levels all the way from 3rd grade to 8th grade? How do you do that? And I think that's the one thing for teachers, for their professional development, it's always asked about, how do I do this? How do I do this? How do I do this? I know it's important. I know this is why we do it, but I need to know how. And I think with sports performance, it's the opposite. I think you really need to know the why. And I think with teaching, it really, the one thing I found out about, in our school here, we are about 95% are low income. We are a private school, but we're because of a voucher system, we're able to get some kids in that that couldn't make it or couldn't do it at public school. So we're able to maybe help those kids a little better. But at the end of the day, what you realize is that there are so many things that that you can't control. Someone asked me, he said, what about state testing? Every teacher you ever, they just shake their head at state testing. I don't care who it is. And I'm not in a position to criticize the people that make those decisions. But at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, should I really be evaluated on my students' state test scores? And I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, okay, I'll do that. I'll base my job on whether my kids do well on the standardized tests. But I just have a couple exceptions. Like, I need to make sure that all those students, right? I need some kind of incentive program. So I need like a cash bonus for every kid that gets a question right. I need to give him like credit to like an Xbox or something. I need to know that the kid is actually trying and the kid's not saying, well, I don't care. What's the difference? And I think that's the one thing that people don't realize is that I don't know if the kid just doesn't care, not trying, or if the kid really just isn't at that level. And I would like to get sleep monitors on all my kids, and any kid that doesn't get 8 hours of sleep, or any kid that doesn't eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I want to get them fed. I want to make sure that they, all these little factors that, that we as teachers, they can't control, are the really thing that, it sometimes is the difference between. And you know what? I think as a teaching today is not about, okay, this kid doesn't get it, so this kid gets a D, this kid fails. It's not about that. Teaching is more and more like coaching. And I think that's one reason why I've kind of fallen in love with it, because I got to get this kid to do it. You can't say, okay, I'm going to have this kid, playing a certain position and they can't make this play. I got this outside linebacker and, well, you can't cover the flat, so we're just going to lose. No one says that. Like, okay, this wide receiver just can't run. He can't run the route at, the proper route. So we'll just keep him in the game and we're going to lose. Well, you do whatever you can to get that kid. Now, you can't replace students, obviously, but you try to do everything you can. So whatever technique, whatever strategy you have in your pocket to get that kid to understand a certain concept and get them to reach those goals and to develop those skills, you do. And that's why it's exhausting, because, again, for every kid you have, they're going to learn a different way, and you have to find a way to try to give them the best opportunity to succeed. So I think that's one of the things that I think people need to understand is that, there are probably more similarities than differences, and Clay Earl spoke at a conference I was at, and he went through this whole process of, we versus me. And he went through no excuses, no messengers, and no sympathy groups. And he went through a whole list, and I wrote a little bit about it because it really made sense. It really made sense for everybody. And like I said, some of those coaching applications, into elementary teaching is really, they fit a little better than I thought they would, for sure.
All right, well, we're gonna cut this here because we got a lot more to talk about. So this has been some great stuff for part 1. So, Coach, thanks for doing this, and we're gonna, stay on line. We're gonna get you for part 2 and put it on the next episode. So, thanks for doing this.
All right, thank you, Anthony.
All right, well, that's going to do it for episode 221 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Special thanks to Chris Pryor and the folks over at Perform Better. Don't forget, right now they're having their holiday sale, 30 to 50% off selected items. So much stuff is on sale. They got up like 4 pages of stuff on sale. Check it out. Also, the lineups for the one-day seminars have been announced. For the one in New Jersey on January 13th, Gray Cook, Robert Dos Remedios, Josh Henkin, and Brandon Marcelli. You can check them out at performbetter.com. All the products and info on all of the upcoming one-day seminars. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Coach Mark Watts for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength conditioning and performance enhancement. Rachel Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Eric DeGotti for the Functional Movement Systems segment. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. And of course, remember, you can try strengthcoach.com out for 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. My name's Anthony Randa. Go to continuefit.com. You can sign up for the Success Series, 5 audio interviews on success in the fitness business. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.